afternoon. I am Lakelyn Hogan, gerontologist and caregiver advocate with Onset Senior Care. I want to thank you so much for joining us for today's Alzheimer's live chat. Our live chats are brought to you by Onset Senior Care, a network of locally owned franchise offices. The Onset Senior Care Network offers in-home care with an individualized approach to help keep your older adult loved ones safe and independent at home. And to learn more, you can visit homeinstead.com. Before we jump into today's topic, I wanted to go over just a few housekeeping items. First of all, we have muted all of your lines to reduce the background noise. We want you to be able to still move about your house, maybe take care of a few tasks like laundry or dishes. Don't worry, we can't hear you on our end, or if the dog comes in barking, have no fear. Your lines are muted. And then if you have questions at any point, we really welcome questions. That's the whole point of these live chats. So at any time, if a question pops up, please feel free to type it into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and it'll show up on our end. Again, no question is a silly question. Please feel free to write those in at any time. And then don't worry about taking notes. We always record these live chats and then send the link back out to you so you can listen to it again, forward it on to a friend or family member, and you can share that as many times as you'd like. And it also goes back up on the helpforalzheimersfamilies.com website. So all of our recordings are there. If you want to listen to past chats, feel free to visit that site as well. And at the end, we always have a resource slide where I will repeat that website for you. So to get us started on today's topic, I wanted to give you a brief intro into the topic of early onset Alzheimer's. So many people tend to believe that Alzheimer's is really only a disease that develops in older adults. However, Alzheimer's is not just a disease of old age. Younger onset, also known as early onset Alzheimer's, affects people younger than age 65. And according to the Alzheimer's Association, between 5 and 10% of the more than 5 million Americans with Alzheimer's have younger onset. Developing Alzheimer's at a younger age comes with some unique challenges. And we are so lucky to have with us today an expert who's going to talk about a variety of topics. She's going to talk about the differences between early onset and other forms of dementia, coping with the emotional stress, figuring out the hard stuff like care planning, financials, that sort of thing. She's going to talk about how it's sometimes difficult to face the future that you've never planned on that comes with this disease. And then balancing work and family. Those with younger onset tend to have maybe young families or still very active families. And again, those come with some unique challenges. So our expert today is Karen Garner. Karen was a caregiver for her husband, Jim, who passed away from early onset Alzheimer's disease in April of 2016. As the founder of the Garner Foundation, she founded this foundation to help dementia caregivers, and she's passionate about educating doctors, lawmakers, and anyone who will listen about Alzheimer's and the toll it takes on families. She started her blog, missingjim.com, to become a face and voice for younger onset Alzheimer's disease. She and her 2 children, Francis and Bradley, have traveled to Washington, D.C. many times to advocate for more research funding and to bring awareness to those who can help facilitate change. Karen lives in Newport News, Virginia, volunteers at her children's schools, and also a proud baseball and softball mom and coach to Bradley's basketball team. So we are so excited to have you today, Karen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lakelyn. It's my pleasure. I am really excited about this chat today. It's obviously very close to home, and I'm so glad that we have so many people that are joining us today. So thank you so much for that warm introduction.
Well, my pleasure. I thought to kind of kickstart this whole live chat, would you mind explaining the difference between the terms? So there's a lot of terms out there: younger onset, early stage, and it can kind of be confusing. Sometimes I even get them mixed up. So would you mind just kind of explaining the differences between those terms?
Sure, definitely. So early onset was basically what younger onset was called several years ago. As a matter of fact, when Jim was first diagnosed back in 2010, 2009, they called it early onset. But people were getting confused because there are different stages of the disease, and there's early stage. And that would be obviously the beginning stages of Alzheimer's or other dementias. And so people would get confused between early onset and early stage. Early stage could be somebody that is 75, 80, 85. They could be any age, but as long as they've been diagnosed with a form of dementia, but they're in the earlier stages. So early onset, they decided to switch and start calling it younger onset, but many times it's still called early onset. So early onset and younger onset are the exact same thing, which would be somebody under the age of 65 that has been diagnosed with a form of dementia. It doesn't necessarily have to be Alzheimer's disease. Many times it is, but it could be younger onset dementia of some form.
Thank you so much for putting some clarity to those different terms. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so it sounds like younger onset, early onset, those two terms are kind of interchangeable. So people might be hearing those terms used by their physicians or different people in the aging field. So thank you so much for that. Well, we have some questions that are coming in. And again, if you just joined us, feel free to chat in your questions at any time. No question is a silly question. Karen is always happy to answer questions, even some tough questions. So please feel free to chat those in. We'd love to hear from you. So the first question that we have really deals with, several people have written in talking about, Alzheimer's, does it run in my family? So Kathy asked, Terry asked, I'm very concerned about this since it has run without exception through my father's side. So do you have any advice or recommendations for Terry? She knows that it runs in her family, maybe specifically the early onset side of things. So any words of advice or maybe some proactive things that Terry can do since this disease tends to run in her family?
Definitely. So younger onset tends to have a lot of the familial aspects, which means it is in your DNA. And so one of the things that frustrates me, because it was in Jim's DNA, his mom passed away from it, his brother passed away from it, and then he had some other family members as well, is, you open up the newspaper or you see things online and they tell you all of the things you can do to stave off Alzheimer's disease. But unfortunately, when it's familial like that and it runs in families, there's not a lot you can do. So the one thing that you can do to be prepared is to have your affairs in order. You can meet with an elder care attorney, specifically elder care, even if you are younger, because you will face a lot of the same things an older person dealing with end-of-life situations are dealing with. You can stay active and stay healthy because that will also help. You may still get the disease, but you can stay in the early stages of the disease longer if your body and your brain are already pretty healthy. So you want to stay active. You want to stay in as best shape as you can. Get out and get some exercise, read a lot. Try not to play a lot of video games or sit in front of the TV all day. Those types of things that you don't use your brain to do. Go ahead and fill out your bucket list. Let's face it. If it does run in the family and your chances are you're going to get it, you can go ahead, fill out your bucket list and start living your life. Make those memories while you can. Talk to your doctor. There is tests out there. You can get tested, have your DNA tested. so that you can find out 100%. Typically, your doctor will have you talk to a genetic counselor, and I highly recommend talking and discussing this decision to have your DNA tested with a genetic counselor. I wouldn't just order something online and, do a swab at home and send it in. There's a lot that goes with getting a diagnosis, or not necessarily getting a diagnosis, but coming to terms with that realization that you have this specific genetic marker in your system. And emotionally and mentally, that can really weigh you down. It can affect your ability to get life insurance. It can affect your ability for certain jobs, especially if you're in the military or have any kind of security clearance and things like that. So there's a lot of different aspects of getting tested that you need to be aware of and really think about, and have some things in place before you get tested, especially life insurance. When you're younger and you get Alzheimer's, or even if you got something like ALS or some other diseases like that, you might have children or family members that are depending on you, and you need to have things in order to make it easier for them as you progress and after you're gone. And you might not be able to do some of those things if you have something already in your medical record or showing that you have this specific disease. So for Terry, I am so sorry that this runs in your family on your dad's side. Again, I highly recommend you go talk to your family physician. If they are not familiar with younger onset Alzheimer's, I highly, highly recommend you find someone who is, because it's very important for you to have that support system from your physician, and for them to understand exactly what this means for you. And Terry, I would also recommend finding yourself a counselor, a good counselor. Sometimes it takes a couple of different tries to find a good counselor that matches up with your personality. But I think that's really going to be important for you to have somebody to talk to cry with, to show frustration and worry and anger and all of those things that you're going to go through should you find out that you do have that genetic marker. So you're going to have to be able to take care of yourself emotionally as well. And please keep in touch with us, Terry. I would really like to know what you decide to do, and if any of the tips that I just mentioned, any of the information that I just mentioned is helpful for you, or if there's more information that you need, I would be more than happy to have a dialogue with you to try to help in any way that I can. So thank you so much for sharing your family's history with us.
Karen, I think that those were some great pieces of advice for Terry. And we also had Beth write in, and she asked a very similar question. You kind of addressed it. She said, can you be tested for the gene, which you mentioned seeing a geneticist, she said, or Alzheimer's in general. So I guess just in the interactions I've had with families, I know that there are some different cognitive tests that people can ask their primary physician for. They can go see a specialist. Can you just tell us a little bit about your experience with Jim and how the different types of tests that you went through with him to get a diagnosis of early onset?
I can. So let's back up. So when Jim was first showing symptoms that there was something wrong, we had no idea what it was because at that time his brother had not been diagnosed. So all we knew is that his mom had passed away from it, and we did not know it ran in his family. So we started a 2-year process of testing. He saw a neuropsychologist. He had all kinds of blood work done to rule out everything. We had lots of scans. He had sleep tests done. They put him on an antidepressant. They thought maybe he was depressed. So there was so many different tests that he had, and each time it came back negative, we started figuring out what it was that he had. And unfortunately, you get to the point where you're wishing that it was a stroke or a tumor. And no offense to somebody that has been through that with family members, I don't mean to disrespect you, but we were actually hoping like maybe he'd had like a mini stroke or had a tumor instead of getting a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So it took us, and it takes many people a couple of years to get diagnosed. I've met tons and tons of people, and they say it took them, anywhere from 1.5 years to 3 years for them to get diagnosed. So it's a very lengthy, arduous process. Now, that being said, flash forward now, we're in 2017, and there have been a lot of strides that have been made into the diagnosis process. And I can tell you, there are some tests now. Jim was actually one of the first ones in our area to have a spinal tap done to test for it, but it came back inconclusive because they had messed up the tubing that they were using. So we couldn't use his test, but there is a spinal tap test that you can do. Sometimes insurance won't pay for it. It's also very painful. If anybody's ever had a spinal tap, they know that's a very painful process. There are also new ways that they're looking at blood work to get it done, not just with the DNA, but with non-familial Alzheimer's and other dementias, to try to get that figured out. For us, we participated in a diagnostic study at the NIH, the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. And so there is a scan there, a Pittsburgh PIP scan, that Jim was able to participate in. And that actually helped with the diagnosis as well. And but there's only a couple of those located in the country. So getting into a diagnostic study helped us, and there might be something like that out there that somebody could utilize. But one thing they would need to do if they, were having some health issues and they thought this might be it, is usually your health insurance wants you to start with your family physician. They're probably going to try the same thing. I hear a lot of stories where they start you off with an antidepressant or getting lots of different tests done. And the sooner you can get to a neurologist, because that's who is going to end up being your doctor if you do have a form of dementia, the better off you'll be, because the neurologists are specifically trained for Alzheimer's and other dementias. And there are other things that can cause the same symptoms of Alzheimer's or other dementias. Parkinson's runs along the same lines, but there are so many different causes of having memory lapses or other symptoms like that. So you definitely you don't want to diagnose yourself. You do want to go and speak with someone, but if you're not comfortable with them, I would definitely recommend finding that neurologist and getting on board with them as best you can. So I hope that answered that question.
Thank you, Karen. So we've talked about, getting our legal affairs in order. That's really important. You mentioned that, making sure you get to a specialist or find the doctor that's going to be the best fit for your situation. And we had Jill bring up, the financial. She says, I'm interested in financial suggestions. The doctor said we need to find long-term solutions soon. We have no long-term care policy, so it will be out of pocket. We do have a POA, a durable POA, etc. We need guidance on how to prepare for the financial discussion with the facility. What will they ask? What will they require? That sort of thing. And Karen, I know that at one point you had decided, or your family had decided to move Jim into a facility. So I thought maybe you could help Jill with some suggestions or kind of give her an idea of how you prepared financially for that, or some things that her and her family should be considering.
Well, first of all, Jill, my heart goes out to you for, going through what you are. It sounds like maybe it's your husband. I don't think it's your dad. Maybe it's your husband that has younger onset or has dementia. And it sounds like he's progressing so that I think you said the doctor said you'll need to find a long-term solution soon. So based on that statement, I'm guessing that it's too late to get a long-term care policy, and you don't have one. We didn't have that either, and so unfortunately, when I had to move Jim into a facility, we didn't really have a plan, because the one thing about younger onset is, typically the person that gets the dementia is still working. They haven't retired yet. You're relying on that income to make a house payment or pay for your car or buy groceries. And so once they stop working, you lose that income. And even if you get, let's say you get on disability, which is what we did with my husband, and I was working, it still took my salary plus the income from disability to pay our mortgage and our house and take care of our kids, because our kids were younger. They're still at home. And so I didn't have an extra $4,000 to $6,000 a month to pay for his care in a facility. And when you're looking at a facility, health insurance does not pay for it. Medicaid, Medicare do not pay just for long-term care. Now, there are some programs out there through Medicaid that will help a little bit, but it's very difficult because you have to find a facility that takes Medicaid and has open beds, and there's usually very few. And if you're on Medicaid, you qualify because of a low income. So if you're looking at having to pay out of pocket, usually what you have to do is you have to spend down all of your assets. Now, being younger onset, what happens is you can keep your house, you can keep one car. They have very specific guidelines. You can keep for you a specific amount of money in the bank, and so you'll have to spend it down. So Jill, my advice to you is to find an elder care attorney, because as you can see, as I'm going through all of these things with you that I'm just mentioning, they're very specific guidelines, and an elder care attorney not only is going to be able to help you with all of those specific things that you're going to have to do, but they're going to help you fill out the paperwork for Medicaid and get it approved. And that's going to be very important. You're not going to want to do that on your own. And if you go to an elder care attorney and they tell you it's going to be like $8,000 or something to get them to help you, don't go back to that elder care attorney. There will be somebody else in your area that's an elder care attorney that will not charge you that much. I've had some people come to me, and that's what they were being charged to get this help. And fortunately for me, we went through 3 attorneys before we found one that could help us with our specific situation, and he did not charge us nearly that much. So don't just go with the first attorney, and make sure they know what they're doing. Make sure they've helped other people navigate Medicaid and they understand younger onset, because it does differentiate from regular dementia that somebody that's already retired and on Social Security would get. So I'm glad to hear that you already have your wills and your power of attorneys, et cetera. But unfortunately, at this stage of the game, there's not going to be a lot you can do financially to plan for it. It's something that you would have had to start a long time ago. And I was in your same situation where I needed all of our income just to keep our family floating, and I didn't have that extra income for Jim. So fortunately for us, what we ended up doing is a good friend started a GoFundMe page, and we paid for his care basically from the goodness of our friends and neighbors and some strangers' hearts who donated money for our family. So that was very helpful. And Jill, I don't know what state you're in, but I can tell you different states have different programs. Every single state is different. So what I have here in Virginia, wherever you're at, unless you're in Virginia, obviously, will be different. There are some states out there who provide a lot more help than others. And so one of the things that you can do is if you have a Center for Excellence on Aging, if you have an Alzheimer's association, that elder care attorney that you contact, even a neurologist, your husband's neurologist might know, start reaching out to all of them and asking about programs that can help you cover the cost of his care at a facility. And don't be scared to, let them know that you need help financially. Sometimes it can be a little embarrassing and a little hard to admit, but in the end, you'll never know what's out there or who's out there that will be willing to help you. I know Florida specifically has a lot of great programs, and there's some other states as well. So definitely check with as many people as you can, especially through social services, to try to find out what programs are available specifically in your state. And I wish you the best of luck, and I hope that you do find a good solution for your husband's care.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing all of that advice. I think that, it's always good to get a second opinion, with the elder care attorney or a second quote. You do that with everything else in your life. We're a society that's always comparing prices. So I think that that's a really good piece of advice. And I know that Jill probably really appreciated that. And I just want to thank you for being so open about sharing your family's experience. And I know a lot of people can learn from what you went through. So thank you so much for sharing that.
No problem.
We do have a question that came in from Debbie, and I want to make sure that we get to her question in case she has to jump off early. But it sounds like she has a sister, 65-year-old sister with dementia, and she has problems seeing. She says all is well at the eye doctor, but then she has problems seeing things. Can this be a brain problem and not an eye problem? What she sees is not connecting with the brain. Do you have any advice for Debbie, or any thoughts on maybe what could be happening? Any advice for her, Karen?
Yes, actually, great question, Debbie. Thank you for sending that in, because it is actually quite common for people with dementia to have some sight problems. And unfortunately, a lot of times they're not able to communicate exactly what it is that they're having a problem with. And sometimes that is why they fall or trip or get off balance, that kind of thing. And a lot of times what happens is their brain, as you can think about, your brain controls everything. So even though your eyes are perfectly healthy, the synapses, the part of the brain that is controlling your eyesight might have plaques and tangles in it, because it is a brain disease. That's an organ. Just like if you were having kidney problems or you were having heart problems, it's the same thing. And so any part of your body that functions could be having problems, specifically from your brain not being able to send those messages to it. And that's why sometimes there are problems with people with dementia that hallucinate and see things that aren't there. And sometimes, like if you have a dark rug on the floor, they might think it's a black hole or something that they would fall into. So their eyes start playing a lot of tricks on them. And sometimes it can give them tunnel vision. I mean, there's just so many different things, different ways that this could happen. So it sounds like you've taken your sister to the eye doctor, they checked her out and said she was fine. But if she is still having eyesight problems, then that would be something you can talk to her neurologist about. I'm not familiar with any medication that would help this. but it is something that they could specifically, knowing her and seeing her and working with her in person, they might be able to give you some very specific guidelines for your sister and yourself. So that's a great question, because it doesn't come up a whole lot, because there's so many other things that, we have to cover when we're talking about dementias with people. But it does cause a lot of problems. And, if your sister is having problems with her eyesight, this could lead to, like I said, her falling and hitting her head or breaking an arm or hip or something. So it is something to be aware of and to try to figure out a way to help her with that, because it's also very scary to have this kind of problem. So not only physically you want to take care of her, but emotionally as well, because I'm sure she's aware of what's happening, and it would be really frustrating and, like I just said, scary as well.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice, Karen. And, making sure that her house, too, is set up for success for her, making sure that there's no clutter, so if she's having some eyesight problems, or making sure it's well lit, making sure that her pathways are clear and well lit so she can get around the house. That would also be helpful, too, in the meantime, when she can't, if she makes an appointment with her neurologist or whatnot. So thank you so much for sharing that. And Debbie, thank you for writing in that question. We do have another question that came in from Colleen. Colleen says, my husband is 62, diagnosed 8 years ago with early onset. He has become quite resistant to help. Our main assistance is from his parents, who are in their 90s. How do you know when it's the right time to move to assisted living? Sorry, I have to scroll down to get to the rest of it. It seems like the right time, but cannot bring myself to do it. So Karen, any advice for Colleen?
Wow. So Colleen, first of all, thank you for writing in. Thank you for listening. Well, first of all, again, just like, my heart goes out to all of you, everybody listening. I'm so sorry you guys are going through this, because I know how you feel. I really do. And it is a very, very difficult decision to make. But I will say this, you're asking, how do you know when the right time is? You already know, Colleen, because you are asking, and you said it seems like the right time. So if it seems like the right time and your gut is telling you that it is the right time, it probably is. Obviously, I don't know any of your story or anything specifically going on with your husband or your family. But if you're getting help with him from his parents who are in their 90s, I'm guessing this is wearing them out. It's wearing you out. And it can get to the point where not only is it wearing you out, but then you're going to start having health issues if you haven't already. His parents are going to start having health issues if they haven't already. And in the long run, that will end up being detrimental to your husband as well, for safety reasons. And so I know it's hard. You said you can't bring yourself to do it. The flip side is you can't bring yourself not to do it, because like I just said, your health and his parents' health is also very important, and ultimately his health. I would suggest biting the bullet, and it is going to be very difficult. If you don't have a facility picked out already, start slow. Just, go visit one that you might have in mind. You can talk to his doctor, or the Alzheimer's Association can recommend some in your area, and just go set up an appointment and talk to the people there and get a feel for it. There's a lot of variations out there with facilities for people with dementia. And, one place that you go may feel good to you, and other places that you go may not. And so, just keep looking until you find a place that you feel comfortable with and where you feel like you would be okay leaving him there. And I want to tell you, once you do make that decision, and you do leave him there, you will feel guilty and you will feel heartbroken and very sad. But ultimately, you're not alone. Thousands and thousands and thousands of other people are having to make the same decision that you are, and are having to get help with their loved one. So you're not alone in that, and you just have to look out for what's best for him and what's best for you. I do recommend highly. I could not recommend this anymore. I think I've mentioned it on like 4 other live chats that we've done. There's a book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. Again, that book is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. And it discusses a lot of this information in there. And I highly recommend reading it. It helped me probably more than anything else that I read in dealing with Jim's care and my emotional side of it and dealing with him day to day. So I highly recommend that book. And Colleen, like I said, take it slow, go visit a place one day, and if you have to take a break, maybe wait a couple of days and go visit another place until you find a place you're comfortable with, and talk to him about it. Let him know what's going on, as long as he seems comfortable with it. And we have a lot of tips for making their new home feel like their old home. Put some pictures up on the wall, a blanket that he's comfortable with from home. Sometimes you bring in your own furniture, so you can bring in furniture that's familiar to him and to you for when you go and visit him. And so it is not an easy decision, but ultimately it is one that will make a huge difference in his health and in yours. So good luck with this, Colleen. I'm really sorry that you're having to make this decision.
Thank you, Karen. I'm actually reading Being Mortal right now. I'm actually listening to it on tape. But I would agree, it is a really good book, very eye-opening. It talks a lot about these hard decisions that you have to make, with not just with dementia or Alzheimer's, but with different terminal type of diseases. So I think that's a great recommendation. I would second that. And my heart also goes out to Colleen. I know this is not an easy decision to make. And so I hope that Karen's tips and advice were helpful. And we actually had another question that kind of goes along with moving a loved one into a care facility. Marcia asked, should I go see my spouse every day now that he is in a dementia care unit, a secured unit? It really takes a toll on me, but I worry about him feeling lost and not knowing anyone. He still knows me, but I see him getting confused with that now. So do you have any advice for Marcia and for those that also might be having those similar feelings?
I do. Well, Marcia, first of all, let me say to you, good for you for going to see him every day. It sounds like you have been. And I want you to not listen at all to anybody that tells you like, oh, I go see my spouse every day and I stay for 5 hours and I wouldn't have it any other way. Because the only thing that's going to do is make you feel guilty if you don't do that. So good for them. There's a lot of people out there, and that's who they are. They take a lot of pride in that, and that makes them feel better, and they can do that. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying that let them say that, but then let it roll right off your shoulders, because I know that really, when we start comparing ourselves to other caregivers or other people or what we think we should be doing, and we have these expectations in our mind that aren't necessarily something that we can do, then the guilt seeps in. And we already have a lot, let's face it, people, as caregivers, we already have a lot of guilt going around. I mean, we've got survivor's guilt. We've got guilt that we lose our patience with our loved one. We've got guilt that we're not doing enough. I mean, we've got guilt that we're not seeing our friends enough, or we're not there for our kids enough, or we're not cleaning the house enough, or, I mean, oh my gosh. So what I want to say to you is let whatever guilt that you would have roll right off your shoulders, because obviously just the fact that you're listening and that you wrote in and that he, that you're going to visit him shows that you've done a great job caring for him. The other thing, Marcia, is that do what you're comfortable with. And I'll be honest with you, I did not go see Jim every day. Sometimes it was because I was really busy. I was working, and I have 2 young kids, and they would have activities, and then I had other stuff going on. And, I got to the point where I realized that Jim didn't really know if I was visiting him every day or not. It was me. I knew, and I did feel guilty sometimes. I got to the point where I didn't. But sometimes what I did is I would skip a day that I knew that somebody else was coming to visit him, like maybe a friend. So that helps me not feel very bad about not going. And so chances are, if he's in a locked facility like that, he doesn't really know. Somebody with dementia that's in the later stages like that really doesn't have a concept of time. And you've probably seen this, where they could say, hey, you haven't visited me in like 2 weeks. And you're like, I was just here yesterday. Or they could say, you just got here and you've been there for 3 hours. That kind of thing. They have no concept of time whatsoever. So, don't worry about him with that, because he's going to be confused about time anyway. And sometimes I didn't go see Jim, not only because of my schedule, but also because, like you mentioned, it was really, really hard emotionally. And if I was already having a bad day, or maybe I was having some issues with the kids, or I was, I was feeling overwhelmed and stressed about our life at that time with everything that was going on, going and seeing him progress or seeing him there would take its toll on me. And so there were some days where I just had to stay away, not because I didn't want to see him, or I didn't love him, or I didn't care about him. None of those things were a factor, just the opposite. The fact of the matter was, that particular day, I just couldn't handle it. I couldn't see him like that. I couldn't pretend to be happy, and I couldn't go see him and not just sit there and cry in front of him. And so, so what you have to do, Marcia, is be kind to yourself. And you have to go when you can, go when you feel like it. And if you can't, or if you're not up to it that particular day or at that particular time, then you need to be kind to yourself. If you can go, maybe get a pedicure or massage, or go to a movie with a friend, or get a cup of coffee, or find a good counselor to talk to, or go for a walk. Do something else for yourself that will get you in a better mindset so that you can go see him the next day. And understand that doesn't mean that you're not a loving wife, or that you don't care, or that you're doing something wrong, because you're not, because he's being taken care of. And that's the main thing. He's safe and he's being taken care of. So good luck, Marcia.
Thank you, Karen. I think that you make a great point. Caregivers are sometimes so hard on themselves. They're trying to do so much. They're trying to juggle their family life and their caregiving role and their role as a wife or a mom or a brother or sister. And so we do need to give ourselves a break and make sure that we're taking care of ourselves, so we can continue to love and support those that we are caring for. So I think that is a great point. And kind of along the lines of, not comparing ourselves to others. Kind of at the same time, Gracie wrote it and she asked, how do we get others to understand what we're going through? I thought that was, an interesting question, because so often As a caregiver, sometimes I hear that you feel so alone in this, but you had mentioned there's lots of people across the U.S. that are going through some of these same challenges. But what about situations where maybe family or friends, they're not really understanding the toll that it's taking or the different emotions that you're going through as a caregiver? So do you have any advice for Gracie on how to help others better understand what you go through as a caregiver of someone with Alzheimer's and maybe more specifically, younger onset?
Well, Gracie, thank you for your question. And, it's like being a parent, where you think you know how you're going to feel and what it's like to be a parent. And for years you've said, oh, when I have a kid, I would never do that, or I will do this. And then you actually become a parent and you hold your child for the first time and you realize you had no idea the love and the emotions and the feelings that you would feel until you actually had your own child. And then you catch yourself doing those very things that you swore you would never do. So being a caregiver for somebody with dementia is along those same lines. It's an emotional journey, it's a physical journey, and it's one where you feel very isolated and alone, and you feel like you're the only one going through this. So first of all, I do want to say you're not going to get somebody to understand what you're going through unless they go through it. There's just not a way for them to really feel it. Even if you were to get them to come help you do your caregiving, I'm not sure if it's a parent or a spouse that you're taking care of, Gracie, but even if you were to let them come and take care of your loved one for a day or two, they still wouldn't quite get it, because unless you're living and breathing it 24/7 and you have the financial worries, and you have to make those hard decisions about care, and you have to, help with their bathing and their feeding. And I mean, the list goes on and on. You all are listening, know exactly what I'm talking about. They're just not going to get it. And it's nothing against them. They could want to get it. They could try. You can talk to them and they could really try. But until you are overwhelmed day in and day out and getting up in the middle of the night with your loved one because they're sundowning and having to watch them change right before your eyes and not be the person that you've loved for so many years, they're just not going to be able to. And it would be nice if they could, but they can't. So first of all, you're not going to get them to. You can get them to come and get a little taste of it and help you do your caregiving so that they have somewhat of an understanding. You can have them read some books and some blogs online, like my blog, missinggem.com, I think did help a lot of people understand about younger onset. But still, there's still some discrepancy between reading something and actually feeling it. So the best thing you can do is be open and honest about what you're feeling and what you're going through, because what you'll be able to do is educate people. It's just like years ago, cancer, nobody really understood what it was like to go through cancer or to care for somebody going through cancer, and it was whispered. Nobody really talked about it out loud or openly. And now what has happened is it's been in movies and it's been in books, and people, they post stuff online and they talk about it and they're not ashamed of it. And one of the best things you can do, Gracie, is just share your frustrations, share your life and what you're going through and what it's like to be a caregiver, and help other people who have never gone through this understand the processes and what happens to a family, because it's not just the person with the dementia that is affected. It's everybody in the family, and so I think it's really important for you to just speak out and share your journey with other people.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that. I've heard I heard somebody use an interesting analogy on how Alzheimer's can affect an entire family. Somebody had said, if your loved one gets a diagnosis of like diabetes, for example, you know, it might affect the family at a family gathering. Maybe there needs to be a sugar-free dessert, or maybe that loved one's family needs to encourage them to eat healthier or check their blood sugar regularly. But when you have a loved one diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it just really kind of ripples throughout the whole family and can really affect everyone. So I like your suggestions about being open with the family and letting them know the different emotions and the different struggles that are happening. And one of the other questions that had come in from Kathy was that she doesn't get any help from her family. They kind of just they never come around. They really don't acknowledge that he has the disease. And so I've heard that from caregivers that a lot of times it's helpful to ask for very specific pieces of help. So for example, maybe asking your brother to mow your lawn for you, or to come over on Wednesday nights for 2 hours so you can go to a different activity. Karen, do you have any other pieces of advice, maybe if you're trying to reach out to your family for help, but maybe they're being resistant, that sort of thing? I know you kind of covered this, but any other pieces of advice in that category?
Yeah, it seems like this happens a lot more often than we would like to admit, or that we realize, where people are in denial. And, you never know, are they in denial because they just don't want him to be sick, or are they in denial because they really just don't want to have to come and help? I don't know, Kathy, I'm really sorry that you're going through this and not getting any help from your husband's family. I know, like Lakelyn just said, you can try to get very specific with them, but they may say that you don't need help if they are in denial that there's anything wrong. They may say, oh, I don't need to come sit with him for 2 hours. So, you might be better off trying to get them around him for long periods of time. I knew my husband, Jim, especially when he was early to mid stages, we could go out to dinner with some friends, or we could go over to their house, or they could run into him in the neighborhood, and they would later tell me, he seemed fine. He looks fine to me. He seemed fine. We carried on a conversation. Are you sure? I actually had people question his diagnosis, and it was so frustrating because I lived with him. I obviously knew what was going on behind closed doors and knew that something was wrong. And I think that's very common as well. So if you could maybe plan a trip for yourself and get one of them or a couple of them to come and stay with him while you're gone for a couple of days, or have him go stay with them for a couple of days. I don't know how that would affect him being out of his element, because I don't know where he is in the stage of the game. So depending on your specific situation, if they're around him 24/7, not just for one day, but if you could make it for a couple of days, for however long you can make it, that might get them to see what is happening and how bad he is getting as well. And so that's one way of doing it. Another way is to basically sit them down, just without your husband there, because you don't want to have this conversation from them, but you need to sit them down. I don't know what kind of relationship you have with them, but if possible, just sit them down and say, yes, he has been diagnosed with this from the doctor. This is a disease that affects his brain, and there will be times that he's good and times that he's not. And I need your help because I can't do this alone. And he's your family, he's your son or your brother, whatever he is to them. And say, you've got one shot here to help us. And one day it's going to be too late, and you will regret not helping and not being here for him when you could. So you can try playing that card. That may not go very well, and it may not be something you can do with his family. So again, specifically, matching with their personalities. It sounds to me like maybe they're just in denial, and the more they're around him, the better their understanding may be. But I'm sorry you're not getting any help from them, because that's a shame. It's a shame that they're not. So I'm really sorry about that for you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that advice. While I think we have time for just one more question, and while we get to that question, I'm going to advance to the resource slide, because I know we've talked about some resources, so I want to give you some time to look those over. But Karen, just one more question. We had Rachel write in, and next month we're actually covering this topic in a little more detail, but she says, I'm 49 and was diagnosed at 47. Just trying to get a grip on the reality before I can't. Depression is an understatement. 2 months ago, I got my license taken away because of this. I'm heartbroken. Any words of encouragement for Rachel and those that are living with the disease? I know we've talked a lot about the family caregiver, but just from your experience, maybe any advice or encouragement that you can give Rachel and others out there?
Well, Rachel, I'm really sorry that you have been diagnosed with this, and I'm really glad that you wrote in. And it's completely understandable that you would have some depression issues. I hope that you are talking to your doctor about that, maybe getting on some medication. I hope that you're exercising, because one of the things to help depression is exercise, for sure. I know that myself from experience. And I'm really sorry that you got your license taken away, because I know that does affect your independence and your ability to do a lot of things. And so I hope that you are also not only speaking to your doctor, but speaking to a counselor and a support group. Check with your Alzheimer's Association and see about a support group in your area. And that goes for any caregiver. I should have mentioned that earlier. I know I mentioned the Alzheimer's Association earlier, but definitely they have support groups that meet on a regular basis. And I highly recommend being part of those. Since you are so young, you probably most likely will be the youngest one there, but the other people that are diagnosed that are in that support group will be able to understand some of your fears, your depression, some of your worries, and what you're going through. So I highly recommend doing that as well. And Rachel, good for you. You know what? You wrote into us. You're searching. You're asking for help here. So good for you. You know what? I hope you have your bucket list, like I mentioned at the top of the hour when we started. I hope you have your bucket list, and I hope you have someone that's helping you fulfill it. And I want you to just keep living your life every day. And, if you can be part of a clinical trial, the first survivor of Alzheimer's or any dementia is going to be somebody that's in a study, somebody that's part of a clinical trial. So if you are at all available to be part of a clinical trial, anybody out there listening, please do. You can go to clinicaltrial.gov and you can look for clinical trials in your area or some that you qualify for, and be part of the solution, because that's also going to make you feel better. It's going to make you feel like you're helping the greater good. You're being part of the greater good and helping other people and being part of the big picture. So I encourage you, Rachel, just to stay strong and, be familiar with Uber and Lyft and those other places that you can get rides pretty inexpensively, and they'll come right to your house. And I hope that you have a good group of friends that are helping you out with this as well, or some family members. And just know that you're not alone. We're all right here with you, encouraging you and feeling for you and fighting the fight for you. So please let us know if you need anything else from us, because we would definitely like to help you as well. So you take care of yourself, Rachel, and thank you so much for listening and for writing in.
Karen, I like that you brought up the clinical trials. There's also a site called Antidote, ANTIDOE me, so antidote.me. It's another great site that will connect you with clinical trials. So I know on that resource slide, we had lots of great resources, alz.org, the Alzheimer's Association site. You can get connected there to your local Alzheimer's Association and join one of those support groups that Karen mentioned. And then on helpforalzheimersfamilies.com, if you are in need of some respite care, there is a Hilarity for Charity grant program where you can apply for free respite care for your loved ones so you as a caregiver can get a much deserved break. And there are no age limits, no income restrictions to apply for that grant, so be sure to check out that. Please join us on our Remember for Alzheimer's Facebook page. We share lots of great tips and advice on there. And then if you want to check out more about Karen's foundation, garnerfoundation.org. So next month we are going to have someone living with the disease joining us on our live chat. We'll have Michael. He is very open about his diagnosis of younger onset Alzheimer's. So I encourage you to mark your calendars for July 11th. And finally, Karen, thank you again so much for being on our live chats. I always enjoy hearing your perspective. I admire all the advocacy work that you do, the support you offer to family caregivers, and just your openness and your authenticity. You're so real and so warm and so encouraging and supportive of all the caregivers out there. And I truly appreciate that, and I know our listeners do as well. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. You're so good for me. I love all these accolades. Thank you so much, Lakelyn. As always, I have really enjoyed it. And thank you to everybody listening for your questions and for listening in. And as always, please feel free to write us with any other questions that you have or any comments or suggestions. We can put them on our Facebook page or on our website because I'm certainly not the end-all be-all of information, and it's always good to get tips from other people on how they're handling these things. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great summer.